items, artifacts have always been very important, and that goes not only like graphic design and things, because that's super important, but also just the material, what paper to choose, what should it feel like, and just, I mean, that down to that level has always from the very beginning been part of what we think is important.
Welcome to the Red Caps Podcast, a podcast where we dip our caps into the blood of our listeners and we ramble on about old school games. Today, I sit down with Tomas from the amazing Swedish company Free League. We are going to be talking about the origin of the company, their wide collection of licensed games, and then we are going to go in depth on a game that I am personally falling in love with, DragonBane. So, without any other preamble, let's get right to the show. And as always, I hope you can sit back, listen, and enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by Tomas Härenstam from Free League. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing well. Free League is a really interesting company in the gaming space. The quality and sheer breadth of games that you guys have been able to put out over the last several years is amazing. Can you tell me a little bit about how Free League came to be? Where did it start from?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And thank you for that. Yeah. I mean, we've been around. We're a Swedish company. We started out, the company was founded in 2011. So it's not that, it feels like recently, but it's not really. It's been around for a bit over 10 years. I mean, we, of course, are au pairs from an early age. I mean, I started myself in the mid 80s. It was a pretty big RPG scene in Sweden back then, but local games. Then Free League kind of started out in the early 00s as a kind of, we're just players funny each other online, started to freelance for other publishers, and that kind of grew into, we started writing for a game in Swedish for another publisher. But then that publisher went out of business, and they asked us if we wanted to take over a project for a new RPG that they were working on, and that we were also working on for them. And that kind of became the starting point of, okay, so if we take this whole project over, we have to have like a framework for that. And so that's when we started the actual company for League. But then it was very much only like a hobby thing, something we did. We had like real jobs. We did this for fun on weekends and evenings, and it was starting out only in Swedish. But then a couple of years later, we did the first game that we translated into English and launched internationally, and that was Mutant Year Zero. Mutant Year Zero was kind of the starting point of doing things outside of Sweden, really. And that was released in 2014, so it actually turns 10 years old this year. That was released to Mutant, was an old Swedish post-apocalyptic game. That was my first RPG back in like 1985 or something. So Mutant Year Zero was actually a new version of that, a new edition of that old Mutant game. So first we did that in Swedish and released it, and then we translated it and released it internationally in December of 2014. And that kind of started things out, and it kind of grew from there. Then things from the Tales from the Loop happened. We started working with Simon Stålenhag and did the Tales from the Loop RPG, and that kind of happened. And then we had a chance to make the Alien RPG, and things kind of just grew from there. And now it's become a full-time endeavor for a few of us.
How big is the team?
Well, the core team we're a bit spread out. Most of us are working in Stockholm, so we're about 6 or 7 people here, and then we have 2 or 3 in other parts as well. So it's about 10 people. Then some of us work full-time, some do other things as well, plus that we have a bunch of freelancers and others who are not like partners, but still work with us quite a bit, but they also do other things. So it's kind of a looser network as well that do a lot of work for Free League stuff as well. So, but the core team is about 10 people.
When I first reached out to Free League, a member of your PR team reached back out to me. She was very nice. And one thing that caused me to kind of giggle a little bit was she had a title called Arcane PR Wizard. And she said she got to pick her title, and that's what she chose.
Yeah.
What is your title at Free League?
I don't think I have one. Not really. I mean, I don't have such a not one so fun and fancy as hers. We're not that big on titles, so she picked her own, and I don't think I really picked one yet. So it's we're a bit loose on that, and it's a lot of, since we're such a small team. Of course, there's a lot of discussions and even arguments sometimes, but usually we don't need to pull rank very much. We kind of just talk things through. So we're not really,
It's not a big hierarchy sort of situation. The you mentioned the gaming scene and how you guys kind of came up through the 80s and into the 90s. What is the gaming scene like in Sweden? So for a lot of us that listen to this show, it's a lot more North American based. So what is the gaming scene like in Sweden? Is it a lot of friendly local gaming stores, or is it more people's homes? Or
I mean, I think traditionally, Sweden is a very small country. Obviously, it's like 10 million now, and it's smaller when back in the 80s. But I think it's back now, and perhaps even more back in the 80s. I think it had a very large portion. I mean, per capita of role players in the country. So back then, it was almost the case that in the mid 80s, I think almost every kid had some inkling of what a role-playing game was. I think it was very common to have you had in a normal family home, there would be a Monopoly and whatever, normal games, but then there will also be DragonBane or Mutant, the two Swedish games that were available at the time. That would be very common to find in anyone's home back then. So I think that the kind of, on average, that it was a big thing, a really big thing back then, and there was also a tradition of creating new games. Even though the first game that was done in Swedish was actually a translation of Magic World by Chaosium, that was released as a fantasy title here in 1982. But pretty quickly after that, it kind of evolved into its own thing. So D&D was not, it was played here for sure, but it didn't become the dominant game. Instead, the Swedish fantasy title, DragonBane, which has a similar title, but it's a different game, that became a Mutant, which is the second game, the post-apocalyptic game that I mentioned. Those two were the dominant games throughout the 80s and also halfway through the 90s, I guess. So that's what, if you meet role players who played back then, that's what they played. Everybody knows those games. So that's made a difference that D&D never made the same impact here. I think now it's a bit different, because now, of course, everything is so global. So it's much harder to have a different scene here than in the rest of the world. So now I think the big Swedish titles are kind of perhaps on par with D&D, but still D&D has made a kind of a bigger impact here recently as well, just because of things like Baldur's Gate and the D&D movies and just Stranger Things and the whole kind of cultural. It's much more mixed up globally now. That it's much more global in scale. So that means I think the difference now is smaller perhaps in the overall RPG scene than it was back then. So, and it still is strong. I think RPGs are still strong here comparatively. There are definitely gaming stores, things like that, conventions, but just because it's a smaller country. I mean, the scene is much larger in North America, obviously. So that's also why we enjoy, and I think the kind of the market here is a bit too small to actually have a very solid, to actually have a business based on. So that's also one of the reasons that we do games in English, because we just need that bigger reach, but also because obviously it's a lot of fun. So, but yeah, so overall I think it's a pretty vivid, living RPG scene in Sweden still. But less different from the North American one than it once was, perhaps.
One of the things I find really interesting about your company and what you guys have managed to put out is you've hit so many different genres of role-playing games and licensed games. Is that in a lot of the North American companies I see, they really struggle to try to get a non-fantasy genre
off the ground and to get a mind share with it. And you guys seem to have had success with it, and also tying it into popular franchises that are also known, like Alien you mentioned earlier. How has that worked for you guys? Like what's the secret sauce that you guys find to be able to get the licensed games and have them be successful in the different genres outside of fantasy and be successful with them?
Right. I mean, I think fantasy has, of course, with the roots in D&D, it's kind of the dominant genre for RPGs, but I think quite as dominant.
I think your audio is skipping there's a tiny bit. Sorry.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you're back now.
And I think going back to what I mentioned before, I think D&D didn't have quite the same impact here, and I think D&D, of course, has made that fantasy kind of the default setting for RPGs, and maybe that was not quite as strong here. So I think it's more common with RPGs in very different genres. So I think that's always been part of gaming here, but I think also specifically for us in Free League, I think our strength and perhaps weakness at the same time is that we enjoy lots of different games. I mean, that's kind of the reason we have like 12 or 13 different game lines. It's not really like something, that was never a business decision. It's just because we enjoyed all these different games and enjoyed thinking about them and making them. So that's really kind of where we come from as persons and gamers, that we enjoy different types of games, different genres, different rule sets that work differently and do different things, and just to kind of have a wide variety of games. So we just brought that into Free League, and that's kind of what we've been doing. And that's kind of also a key philosophy from the very start, is that every game, even though we do use in most games what we call the Year Zero engine, which is a rule set, a kind of a rules core, we adapt it and tweak it pretty heavily so we really want to bring out the theme of the game, the style of the game, the types of stories that the game should be telling, and incorporate that into the rules in an effective but not too complicated way, so that it's intuitive and easy to grasp and still gives you the feeling of the source material that you want to capture. Like playing the Alien RPG should feel like being in an Alien movie. I mean, it should have that sense of horror in space. So that goes through all the games that we make, no matter which genre it is. So it's always been what we try to do and enjoy doing.
In the video game space for a long while, it's definitely changed in the last few years, I think. But when I was a kid growing up, and even up until probably 10-15 years ago, if you saw a video game that had a major license, like a movie license attached to it, you often kind of looked at it with side eye, because you weren't sure what was coming from it. In the tabletop space, though, it seems like a lot of these have worked out. Is it a case of companies like yourself reaching out to the licensees and saying, hey, we're big fans of Alien, or we're big fans of this, and we'd like to make a tabletop game around it? Or is it those companies saying, this is an area we haven't explored, and your company seems to be the one to go to make this happen? Like, which way does that conversation generally go?
Right. I think mostly, at least as far as I know, and it's been the first of those two cases, that gaming publishers like ourselves have been reaching out to these license owners and out of passion, basically. And I think that might be the reason that they have been doing fairly well. That it's when we reached out to make the Alien RPG, that's because we were huge Alien fans. It was of course we hoped it would do well, but it didn't start as like a business proposition only. It came out of passion. It also came from us. I think maybe that's possibly started to change a little bit, because there have been some success for these licensed games that now actually the license owners themselves are exploring tabletop RPGs. But I think that's fairly new. Up until very recently, I think tabletop RPGs were seen as such a small and niche thing. It was not really worth their time, maybe. So, but that I think is changing a bit now. But I do think that fact that it's been, I think, often initiated by the publishers, that I think also has made it kind of led to products of higher quality, because it came out of passion for source material. I think that has really helped.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can really see that in the products that have come out. There's been how I first discovered Free League, like the first game of your guys' that I played and messed around with was Forbidden Lands, and I remember getting that box set, and I opened it up and I went, how did they manage to make a game? Well, the game itself was really cool, but just the materials in the box, the first impression you get when you opened up that game, it was just shocking to see in a world where you've got so much like print on demand stuff and what have you that would come in from various spots. The quality difference was just huge, and that just kind of sucked you right into wanting to dive into the books and get into them. So with that, how do you guys manage to deliver on that? Like, because it seems pretty consistently that you know the physical products that you guys put out seem to be of really high quality. The Kickstarters always seem to do well. What is it that you guys do differently from a production of the physical materials?
Items, artifacts have always been very important, and that goes not only like graphic design and things, because that's super important, but also just the material, what paper to choose, what should it feel like, and just, I mean, that down to that level has always from the very beginning been part of what we think is important. I mean, of course, a lot of things are moving to digital now. There's virtual tabletops and things. And we've always felt that, of course, the game needs to be good, obviously. I mean, the writing and the mechanics, but then there also needs to be the art and graphic design needs to be there, because you need that to actually get into the game. So that's super important, but also the kind of physical aspects of the game as well. And we just want to have all of those things in the package. For us, you need all of these things to make an RPG really sing. At least for me, if only one of them it feels like, if the game's great and the art is great, but then it's printed on some cheap thin paper that just doesn't fit the game, that can kind of ruin the experience for me. That's kind of silly, but that's kind of how I feel, and I think that goes through what we do. And it's always great when others kind of appreciate that as well.
You mentioned that in most homes in Sweden, you had Mutant, and you had another game which you've now re-released in English as DragonBane. Yeah. And that's part of the reason I wanted to reach out, because I've recently kind of stumbled across DragonBane and been playing with it a little bit, and it's really, really interesting. I'd never heard of this prior to you guys putting out the release of it. How many editions did it go through prior, like in its history, as it was going through before you guys got your hands on it?
Actually, that's a point of discussion. And most people say ours would be the edition number 11. It could be edition 10, depending on how you count earlier editions, whether one edition was actually edition or just a kind of a slight tweak, So it has a long history. First edition came out in 82 and was a straight translation, as I mentioned, of a short game that Chaosium did in 82, kind of a generic fantasy game. And then the one that everybody had came out in Sweden, came out in 84, and that was my second game. That was like the black boxed set that everybody kind of knows about. So and of course they named the game Drakar och Demoner, which means dragons and demons. So it was, pretty clear where the inspiration of the name came from. I don't think, probably you couldn't do that today, but back then in 82, I guess nobody cared or knew. I don't know. So that game, that name has been around since then, and the game has taken many different forms. It has been published by different companies. So now, but it hasn't really ever been done translated. So we initially, because this is kind of the original biggest Swedish RPG, so we just thought that it would be great to make our own edition of it. But the brand was owned by another publisher for a long time, so we couldn't do that until we actually got the opportunity to acquire the brand and the trademark from them, and that was 3 years ago now. And then we thought, okay, but this game, nobody knows about it. It's pretty, I mean, it's only known in Sweden, and it's a fairly kind of classic, in a sense, generic in some sense fantasy world. So that it wouldn't really make sense to publish it in English, maybe. But then we started working on it. So that was the intention initially, to only do it in Swedish. But then we had a lot of fun developing it, and we felt, the more we worked on it, the more we felt that this can actually be something, not just an old game in a new edition, but actually something fresh and new and different, and it could fill a very good niche for us also internationally, in that it's not only for beginners, but it's a very beginner friendly game, easy to get into. It has a kind of lightheartedness that I think we have previously leaned a bit more into the grimdark and kind of those kinds of games, which I really enjoy. But DragonBane is a nice change of pace. It has that lightheartedness. It has the mallard class of the ducks. It's just fun and easy, and it has but still kind of can be kind of brutal in the kind of OSR vibe a little bit, that you're not super powered in it. You can, even the lowliest goblin with a lucky shot can take you down, even if you're the big hero, which we kind of enjoy. So it kind of grew, and then also interest in the game grew from gamers in other countries. So in the end, we felt, well, let's just do this in English as well and see what happens. And as it's been very well received, and it's been doing really well. So no, we're super happy with it now, and working on we put out a bestiary, and now we're working on the first big campaign books. That's finishing that now. We'll probably go to print in a couple of weeks, and it's now become one of the most important titles for us, I guess. So it's been very interesting.
So with you guys being number 10 or number 11 in the editions of this game, was there, much like how there is in North America, where everybody is constantly debating and almost doing like an edition war in D&D?
Yeah.
First edition was better than this edition. Is there a similar vibe with the game there? And if so, how did you guys then choose which features or what vibes from various editions that you carried forward?
Yeah, it's not easy. I think usually there's been so many different editions, and some of the editions were very, very different. So I don't think they might have some hardcore fans too, but they weren't so far off into a tangent that they don't really feel like this game. But so I think the editions that some people really hold on dearly to, especially some of the older gamers, are like the mid 80s versions, maybe not the very first ones, but the one towards like the mid late 80s. Though they definitely have a strong fan.
Our audio is going a little bit there again.
The screen shuts down or something.
Yep.
Or the screensaver. Oh, never mind. Yeah. So in any way, there's definitely an element of edition wars between, especially with some of the early editions. But I think that's, as tends to happen, we had this similar thing when because we did a new edition of Twilight 2000 a little while back as well. And that's also a game with a long legacy and earlier editions that were beloved. And of course, you have fans who think that the early editions were so much better in every way than what we're doing. And you'll have some of that, not that much, honestly, but there have been some. And of course, you're welcome to feel that way. That's totally fine. But I think as time goes by, and as even those diehard fans of earlier editions try the new edition, and in some cases I would say that we have some people have come around and actually kind of felt that this is not too bad. So the editions I think they're there, but it's kind of dying down a bit. So I think we've won quite a few people over. But then of course, if you prefer the old version, that's totally fine as well. We don't judge.
The tagline of the game is mirth and mayhem. And you mentioned earlier that, the Mallard class brings in a little bit of the silliness and a little bit more of the lightheartedness. What other areas of the game would people find the mirth side rather than the mayhem side?
Right. I mean, I think a lot of the characters are kind of have a humorous part. It's not a farce. It's not like a comedy, but there's definitely kind of a lightheartedness, even to other, not only the Mallards, but also to other characters in general in the adventures. I think one obvious thing that I think does a lot for the tone of the game is also the art by Johan Egerkrans, who does amazing art, and he brings that lightheartedness into pretty much every, even like the fiercest monster, it still has a touch of fun in it. It's drama and danger, but also kind of a light touch and a lot of fun in there. So I think that brings out the mirth theme as well, really well. And that's something we try to do when we write adventures. Of course, they should be dangerous and difficult, but they should also be, an opportunity to have fun and laugh at the gaming table from time to time. So that's really something we try to keep in mind when writing adventures as well. So it kind of goes through the whole game and everything we do for it.
Yeah, his art style is amazing. I had completely separately from any of the games that he's worked on, went and grabbed. He has a book, and I'm always curious how this is pronounced. But is it Vasen or Vasen or?
Yeah, I would say Vasen. In Swedish is Väsen, but Vasen, yeah, that works. And that basically means
monster.
Creature.
Oh, creature. Okay.
Yeah, creatures, monsters, critters. It's just a word for beings of different kinds. But it's in Swedish, the word is often used for these kinds of creatures of folklore that this Vasen game is focused on.
Yeah, so he's worked with you guys on the game, as well as he has his own book, which is just a collection of Scandinavian monsters that or creatures that he has put out. And I had first found him through that book, flipping through it and just being like, "Oh, this is amazing! The art style was awesome." And then I found out that he was working on games as well, and it was his art style is amazing. It really ties a lot of the books together really, really well. For those of us that come from a D&D background, the game is mechanically very different. Obviously, there's a lot of difference in mechanics. What would you say is the biggest difference between the two? Is it something like the fact that you're rolling under instead of over being probably a clear one? But how would you differentiate somebody who had only ever played D&D and they're coming to DragonBane for the first time and be like, hey, this is how we do things differently here?
Yeah, no, I think one thing obviously that I can mention is the roll under instead of roll over system. It's still a D20 based, but you want to roll low, not high. So that's clearly a difference, but that's pretty easy to learn. It's just the opposite. I think on a more kind of fundamental level, I think a difference is, I think I alluded to this a bit earlier, that it's a bit less high epic, I guess. I mean, there can definitely be epic moments for sure, but you don't have a level system. It's a more incremental progression for characters, and that means even after you played a couple of adventures, and you won't be so overpowered. You won't be so that much more powerful than the odd typical orc or skeleton. It can still be a major challenge. You will get better, significantly so, but not to the extent you're still vulnerable. So combat is still dangerous, not in the sense that you will die all the time, but you definitely, every single attack typically has the potential to take you out. Maybe not kill you, because that can happen, but that's not that common. But you can get knocked out and potentially end up by death's door and need to be saved. So there's an element of danger that I think might be a difference. I think you get that more when you play D&D on the lower levels, when you don't have that many hit points. In DragonBane, there are ways to increase your hit points, but you won't, not by much, and that's quite difficult to do. So most characters will have the same amount of hit points throughout the game. I mean, that obviously makes a difference. You will improve in other ways. And I think also another difference is that D&D, which is, and that you can, and that is a lot of fun, but you have a lot of options for character to tinker with your, lots of new abilities, new feats, new abilities to build, and different combos and things. And that can be a lot of fun, but it can also be kind of daunting, and you can kind of get bogged down in it, at least to my mind sometimes. I think DragonBane definitely has character customization abilities. You can tweak your character in some ways and do things with it, but overall, I would say it's less complex in that aspect. So it's a bit faster at the table. Combat is quick. It doesn't take as long, so you can get more action in a smaller amount of time, I think. But of course, in the end, it's a matter of personal taste. But I think if you played a lot of D&D, I think this can be a nice change of pace, because it's similar in some ways. It's still the same type of world, even though the beings and monsters and so on are slightly different. We brought on a couple of things from more like Nordic folklore, even though that's more Vaesen, but there's some of that in DragonBane as well. But overall, you can it's a nice change of pace. Try out a couple of one-shots, and it works well as a kind of a palate cleanser, if you will, just to kind of get something else on the table and have a lot of fun with it for an evening. And then you can play a longer campaign if you like, but I think the quickness of it is a difference, as well as the other things that I mentioned.
Yeah, I really like the character advancement in it. The game is classless. Any character can become anything that they wish to in the game, and you advance by doing, by playing the game. So for those that aren't aware of it, the game has a ton of different skills, and if you roll a Bane or a dragon or a demon, sorry, I almost said Bane or Boon. If you roll a dragon or a demon on a check of a skill type, at the end of that session, you then have a chance to improve that skill set, which is really neat, because it becomes the power creep doesn't really happen in DragonBane. I don't think that you would see in a D&D game, because, like you said, the hit points don't rise, and you're getting better at the things that the table itself is obviously willing to engage in, because they're doing it, and that's how they get the improvements. So,
yeah.
The other big thing that I noticed the difference right away is in combat, the differences between an NPC and a monster. A goblin is very different than, say, a manticore or something. So there's a huge difference in how they're treated. Can you talk a little bit about monster combat and why you guys went that way with it?
Yeah, that's been a thing. Actually, that started, I think Forbidden Lands was the first game where we did it. And then we've been it's not identical, but we tinkered with it, and we used a similar system in Alien, actually, and then also in DragonBane. And the idea is that instead of treating a monster like a regular NPC, it works a bit differently. And we have a table of monster attacks. And instead of having, as you would normally have, like for an NPC, they have like 1 or 2 attacks, and they pretty much do that same thing over and over again. You roll on an attack table and then see what the monster does, and it could be anything from roaring, which will terrify the characters, or attacking, and so it becomes more unpredictable and more dangerous, which is, I think, makes combat with monsters more fun and terrifying, because a monster will not, you can't use normal tactics against it. You have to kind of adapt to these attacks that the monster will do, and they will be more unpredictable and more dangerous than facing a normal NPC. And also, what we've added is that normal characters can do 1 action per round, but monsters, depending on their ferocity rating, can perform several actions per round. So that's also a way to make a single monster more dangerous. I think that's something when we first did Mutant Year Zero, which also has monsters in it, like mutated monsters in the zone and so on. We didn't have that system, and a general problem that kept coming up is that even a very powerful monster can be quite quickly taken down by a group of 4 or 5 characters. So that's so the idea of the monster attacks, the ferocity rating, and doing things like that is actually a way to make a monster feel really dangerous and difficult to face without just giving it a million hit points, but make it dangerous and difficult to defeat in some other way. And that we use a version of that system in DragonBane as well. And there it actually goes one step further in that monster attacks always hit. Some people were very surprised by this and felt that was completely unfair, but we feel it actually works. It reduces dice rolling a little bit, since you anyway roll to produce which attack the monster will perform, but then you don't roll to hit for the monster. It just hits unless you dodge or parry or do something to get out of the way. But that also underscores that monsters are just lethal. You have to kind of be on your toes when you fight them. So that's kind of the theory behind that, and usually I think it works pretty well.
Yeah, from on the DM side of the table, it's really interesting because you have the more strategic side of combat when you're playing with, say, goblins or normal creatures, and you can kind of, play it from a strategic standpoint and do that dance. But then whenever a monster enters the field, the DM also kind of gets to be almost a spectator to it, because the monster is so random and so it's going to hit every time. So there isn't as much of a strategic thought. It's, hey, let's see what the monster does now, and you roll the dice with the table comes up with.
So even for the GM, it becomes a bit of a interesting to see what happens, because even the GM won't know what the monster will do.
Right. The parrying and combat options are really neat. Like giving the ability to almost do rules from the OSR where people used to block with a shield and have a chance for the shield to sunder. You guys kind of have that built in with the whole parrying system and stuff like that, which is really, really neat. So yeah, there's a lot of differences between the game, but I think it's something that people who are familiar with D&D overall can quickly pick up and roll with it. Is it something, given the long history of the game and the different editions, and I'm sure there was a lot of material put out, is there a lot of back catalog material that may come forward into an English version as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot published over the years. Some of it really good, some not so great. It's been just so much over time. So what we've been doing now is that we will do completely new stuff, but we're also doing new editions of some of the best classic adventures. And that's actually one we have up now we have a pre-order running now for a campaign book called Path of Glory. And Path of Glory was actually the first campaign that was published for this game. It came out in campaign in the sense that it was like 3 interconnected adventures. They were published separately in small booklets in 85 and 86. We're doing one book where they're all together, but we're basically reimagining in that same campaign and working with the original author, Roger Unhagen, who did that first, wrote the original campaign, and we're working with him now to make the new version. But of course, it does have the same core elements. So there's a lot of the stuff that's still there and was really good. But we're also updating it in terms of rules, obviously, and art, layout. Everything it's a new product, so it doesn't look like the old one at all. But it does have that old core, and we have a few more of those older campaigns that were really good that we want to do again in new versions. But then we'll do that. Not only that, but we'll do that and also mix in completely new stuff as well. So we're working on new adventure modules, and also like a book of magic. We released the bestiary with more monsters. We're doing a magic book and other things that will be completely new. But so we mix kind of new editions of old stuff with completely new things.
Sweden and Canada have a very common love interest in a topic that has absolutely nothing to do with gaming, so to speak. But I got to ask, if you had to nail down your favorite Swedish hockey player, who are you picking?
That's hard. I mean, I don't know. I think I always like Mats Sundin, but Peter Forsberg, and of course Börje Salming as well. It's hard to pick one, but those would be Niklas Lidström. But there are so many, but those are the big ones. Obviously, it's hard to pick one of them, to be honest.
Yeah, as I live just outside of Toronto, so as soon as you say Sundin, I'm nodding along, and as soon as you say Salming, what have you as well. Forsberg and Lidstrom, and there is a
Yeah.
lot. Lundqvist, there'd be a lot of players that'd be hard to choose from. Does the winter, you think, is that part of the reason why the gaming became so popular? Is it's cold, I want to stay inside and hang out with people.
I think so. Definitely, I think that has something to do with it for sure. That the long winters, the long dark winters, where there's not much to do and you can't really be outside, or you can, but it's just not fun there. So I think that meant gaming and games. I think that really helped make that a big thing. I also think that there has always been a pretty strong element of, I mean, there's been, since early on, you could get actually like small grants from like local communities to start like gaming clubs and things. I think that might have helped also, that it was kind of encouraged by society, so to speak, to kind of do these things. So that might also have helped to some extent. So yeah, but the winners definitely, I think that's definitely part of it.
So you guys didn't have like the whole satanic panic where there was a period of time where gaming was shunned, I assume that?
There was some of that. That came a bit later. I think that kicked in like the early 90s here, and was a thing for a while. There was like a campaigning against tabletop RPGs as being, degrading or bad for young people or something. But by then, things had already started to shift. I think one thing that did happen that was part of that was that a game called Cult was released, a horror game that was released by the same company who did Mutant and Dr. Mono. And that was released in 91, I think. And that was a very kind of, it was a horror game inspired by Hellraiser and films like that. And that created a bit of an uproar in some circles. And that actually meant that tabletop RPGs, because they were all basically from that one company, were no longer, they stopped being sold in like kids' toy stores. And that kind of changed things. I think that was not only because also in the 90s, you started to get, video games came in very big and kind of took over to some extent. So made tabletop RPGs more of a niche thing. So there was definitely that satanic panic phase, but it came a bit later. And at a time when I think tabletop RPGs were already kind of transitioning from the mass movement for teenage kids into something a bit more niche for a bit older people, or not really old, but anyway, it became less of a kids thing and more of an adult thing.
So as we're now kind of going into almost a golden age again of tabletop role-playing games, what's next for Free League and what's next for DragonBane? Like what do you guys have planned coming up?
Right. I mean, we have so much. It's a bit, that's kind of been our Achilles heel, that we get excited about a lot of things. So we have to kind of steady ourselves and make sure we, do a good job and finish something, and also not just finish a game, but also continue to support the game before we jump onto something new. So for DragonBane, that's what we're doing. I mean, like I mentioned, Path of Glory is finishing up right now, and then we have Book of Magic coming, another adventure campaign book in the works. So lots and lots of stuff for DragonBane on the way. But then we also have, of course, now running a Kickstarter for an expansion for the Blade Runner RPG, which we're supporting. We're doing new things for Alien. We're doing a new version, a new edition of Coriolis, which is the Free League's original sci-fi game. And a bunch of other things. So yeah, we have our hands full.
When you sit down for an interview like this with anybody from the gaming scene, and they're going to ask a bunch of questions, and you have no idea what's coming to you beforehand, I'm sure you have some sort of a play in your head of like, okay, if this gets asked, I'm going to answer it this way, or what have you. Is there any questions that I didn't ask that you're like, man, I really wish you would have brought that up so I could have plugged on this? Or is there topics that you don't get to chat about very much that you wish you had more opportunities to do on interviews like this?
I don't know. I think it's been good. It's been pretty broad. It's always fun to talk about your own background and Free League's background. I think we kind of covered that. So, and my favorite games, and yeah, no, it's I think I can't think of anything right now, but of course there's an endless amount of things to talk about. But yeah, I think we did a pretty good job, you and I, to cover things here.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me. I'm enjoying DragonBane so much. I've enjoyed Forbidden Lands before, and I will continue to explore more Free League games, and I encourage everybody else to do as well. The one thing that I wanted to call out and also thank you very much for is at least with DragonBane, I've got with like Forbidden Lands I own physically, but with DragonBane I was really impressed with the VTT side of it, of how well the VTT integration is for Foundry. I saw that's there for Roll20 as well, I believe. But it really makes the experience coming into it and being able to get it up and going quickly very well done. So thank you for that. Where can people find all of the games and information on upcoming Kickstarters or upcoming pre-orders or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest place is just our website, freeleaguepublishing.com, freeleaguepublishing in one word.com. I think you'll find pretty much everything there. That's the immediate, and then you can just, search Free League Publishing or Free League on your social media of your choice, and you'll find us there as well. And on Kickstarter, we're running one right now, so you can find Blade Runner Replicant Rebellion there also. So feel free to check it out.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for coming on. I really do appreciate it, and I will let you get on to the rest of your day. But I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Red Caps podcast. I hope you enjoyed, that you learned something, and that you were eager to come back for more. www.theredcaps.net has all the links to all the ways to contact me, and I would love to hear from you. Thank you ever so much for listening, and remember, never let your caps dry out. Stay safe. Have fun. We'll talk again soon. Take care.